in this episode with Anne Tolley.
But I am a bit of a stroppy sort of a person. I'm a straight talking sort of person. So, and I think I always have been, even as a child, quite determined, quite resolute, and I guess one of the characteristics that I've learnt about myself is I don't like people to see when I'm emotionally affected. They're very strict.
What were you? Okay.
Yeah, they're very strict. So, almost perfectionist, really. So it was one of the things that I used to growl at them, complain to them about that. I always had to do the very best that I could, which meant if I came second in something, it was, well, why didn't you come first? What was it that you didn't do that you didn't come first? Whereas, I thought coming second was pretty good. And I was the only one, actually, of the 4 children that didn't go teaching. All my brother and sister trained as teachers, and my youngest sister ended up teaching. She trained in hospitality and then ended up teaching that. So I was the only one that didn't go teaching. But as I said to my dad, I became the minister. So that was when I knew that if you really wanted to make a difference, you had to be in Wellington. It's a failure to address that core, to take them on that journey with you. And I understand it, because change is really worrying for people. It can be quite traumatic. We fear change, generally, as human beings. Looking back on it, I didn't have the strength to say, this is not for me anymore. I just took the easy way out, really. And then some of them went and put themselves in front of the car with their children. They had small children with them. And that was really scary, that they would risk, put their own children at risk to make a political point.
Anne, thank you very much for joining us today and giving up some of your precious time. I know you're extremely busy, so I'm grateful for that. What I'd like to do is ask what can be a tricky question to start off with. The show's called Life's Work. Can you describe to me how you would maybe sum up what your life's work is?
I was thinking about that, actually. I don't have an easy answer. I got into politics because I wanted to, first of all, work in my community. So I guess underneath it all is a desire to improve whatever I'm involved in, is to make it better for people.
Right.
And that underlies everything, I think.
Yeah, very good. Okay. So then if we can, I'd like to sort of go back in time a little bit and talk about Anne maybe as a child. If you could describe what it was like growing up, where you grew up, and what kind of character were you back then?
Well, I'm the eldest of 4 children, and both my parents were teachers. So I grew up in quite a strict, and I think the eldest is always the one who's more responsible, who has to take the lead in the family, and it was, and even with my own children, the first one, you don't quite know what you're doing, so you tend to be a bit more conservative. But I had a great childhood. Very, very close family. Uh, um, we started off, I was actually started off in the West Coast, way down. My dad did his country service down in a little place called Jacobs River, which is down by the Franz Joseph Glacier, and then moved to Nelson. I remember Nelson. I went back to my primary school in Stoke as a Minister of Education and saw my classroom is still there. And I remember that move from Nelson to Hawke's Bay when I was about 7, and I couldn't understand why my parents had left such magnificent beaches where we spent a lot of time. My parents were fishers, and we moved to Hawke's Bay where the beaches were all pebbles, stones. So then I spent the rest of my time growing up in Napier, in Taradale, and really had a very good childhood. I loved school. I took part in all sorts of things at school. I was one of those active sort of people, and I've always believed that if you want to have good experiences, you've got to put a lot into it. So the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. So I was involved in sport. I was involved in art and drama and debating, and you name it, I took part in it. And really had, when I look back, I had a great childhood.
Yeah. I'm detecting a slight bit of emotion there talking about your childhood. Is that fondness?
Yes, and I've lost both my parents within 18 months of one another, really, 2020, and then I lost my mum in 2022. So it is quite raw still, that family.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't push you too much on that stuff. I know how that feels. So can I just go back to a second? You made a comment, obviously moving to the Hawke's Bay. Was that because of your parents needing to move for work?
Yeah, my dad. I remember asking my dad because we'd gone from this love South Island and that crisp winter weather. And I remember asking him why we were moving, and because he was a teacher and he was a very ambitious man, and he said, well, if we move to Hawke's Bay, it's a bigger population and I've got more chance of actually then moving in my career without having to move the family.
Yeah. And so I'm interested, actually, just the reason why it's very personal, I suppose. My daughter on the way to school today, she's saying goodbye to a friend who's moving to the South Island because of her parents needing to move for work.
Yeah.
And I know that particular girl's probably not 100% happy about doing that, and dealing with that, the consequences of that. So how did that? Can you remember how that felt for you as a child?
Oh yes, and it was quite traumatic. Made worse by the fact that my mother was a sewer, and actually she became a homecraft teacher. And so most of our clothes, and children's clothes in those days were very expensive, so most of my clothes my mother made. And my very best dress I was allowed to wear to my new school on the very first day. But it was the uniform of the Catholic school next door. And that didn't go well. And, no one takes any notice of it today. But all those years ago, it was still quite a thing. And, I didn't have a good start at my school. So the move is unsettling enough, and then to go into your new school and find that you're ostracised for quite some time was quite difficult. And obviously I still remember it all these years later.
Yeah, clearly, yes, that's right. Yeah, it's obviously a big impact. So as a character, and back then, how did you, what kind of character were you that maybe enabled you to handle that, or, did you handle that?
I probably did. I was always a good student, so school was important to me, and my parents, obviously, as teachers, valued education. So I just buried myself, really. But I am a bit of a stroppy sort of a person. I'm a straight-talking sort of person. So, and I think I always have been, even as a child, quite determined, quite resolute, and I guess one of the characteristics that I've learnt about myself is I don't like people to see when I'm emotionally affected, whether they've hurt me or whether I'm cross or whether I'm grieving. I keep a lot of stuff inside, and I suppose defence mechanism. And I don't know whether that's, and I've talked to other elder children, and some of them, not all of them, have that same. So you're the one that's expected to keep everything together when everything's a bit chaotic.
Leadership. I suppose.
Leadership, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think are the consequences of that, Hara? I mean, is that something that you've carried through life? Does it have a consequence? Keeping that stuff in
Yeah,
as
it
opposed to
does.
letting
Yes,
it
it
out?
does. And particularly today, we're much more open about our emotions. So, I was uncomfortable with the fact that I could feel myself welling up when I talked about my early family life, because it's quite raw, actually. And I've got my sister living with me at the moment, my youngest. She's the youngest in the family, and she had a dream last night, and she was just telling me as I came to work, she dreamt about her parents. So it's obviously there, but I feel uncomfortable with showing those emotions, and yet I burst into. I mean, I tear up. It was terrible as Minister of Education, I have to say, and I go to schools and these kids do these wonderful things, and I'd find myself tearing up so quickly. But that's a bit different.
It's a different thing, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. So, sorry, we skipped forward a little bit there. But so, at school, you've got both your parents are teachers.
Yes.
They're
very strict.
What were you? Okay.
Yeah, they're very strict. So, almost perfectionist, really. So it was one of the things that I used to growl at them, complain to them about, that I always had to do the very best that I could, which meant if I came second in something, it was, well, why didn't you come first? What was it that you didn't do that you didn't come first? Whereas, I thought coming second was pretty good, but to them it was always push me. Yeah.
Yeah, I read somewhere that they were always, encouraging you. Well, I'll use the word encouraging you to strive for more.
Yeah. Think of it. My mother used to say, think of a word, think of a better word.
Right.
So, that was a constant thing, because I did a lot of public speaking and debating. Think of a word, think of a better word. You go into politics, you think of a word, think of a simpler word.
Right. Yeah,
It's quite the reverse.
Yeah. Okay. And how did, looking back now retrospectively, did that serve you well?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, of course it was the right thing to do. And my frustration was they didn't push my brother the same way.
Right, okay.
But I can't complain, because it has served me well.
Yeah.
Always strive to do the very best that you can.
Yeah.
And never be afraid to try something new. And if it doesn't work, that's fine.
Yeah. How did that feel? And I'm asking questions about your childhood, and I can't remember most of mine, but how did that kind of feel as a child, though? Obviously looking back, that it was the right thing to do, and it served you well. But did it feel that way as a child, or did you feel like you were constantly being on at?
It depended. If I did achieve, I mean, I had a great relationship with my dad. I miss him every day. But I was always trying to please him. Really, when I look back now, my whole life I've been trying to please him, and he wasn't an easy man to please, because he always demanded more, and at times that was hard. But at other times when I did succeed, I knew that he felt pleased and proud, and helped me celebrate some of those successes. It was a different age too. I mean, a couple of times he missed important occasions for me, which I was quite resentful about, because he was working. So those were the days when Dad went to work. Dad's job was really, really important. The whole household revolved around Dad's job, and he was quite distant.
Yeah.
Whereas, because he was climbing the ladder, but whereas my youngest sister, who was 11 years younger than me, she had a completely different relationship with him, because by that stage he'd reached the top of his career, and he had a bit more time to spend. And so So I envied her that. But as you get older, you have a different relationship as you have your own family. And so, I had a good relationship, but it would have been nice to grow up 11 years later.
Yeah, okay, yeah. How do you think that your childhood and upbringing, obviously you've got fond memories of that, and it served you well, as you've said. How does that I mean, obviously each family is different, but in general terms, like you said, it was a kind of different era. How do you think it compares with like today? I'm speaking as I've got my youngest daughter's 12, and I'm trying to encourage her to be the best that she can be, and all I get back is that I'm going on at her, and it seems like it's a different kind of age that where it's not coming second, it's participating that counts, and all of that kind of stuff. Just do you have an opinion on that?
Look, kids know, and you can't fool kids. They're actually really smart. So we had this, you get this a lot all the time. It's not the winning that counts; it's the participating. And I listen to my granddaughter when she's playing netball, and she's now 11, and she's, they know who wins. You might not get any recognition for winning the game, but they actually know who's got the most goals. So I think it's more of an adult thing that makes us feel good, but actually the kids know.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it was a different era, and even with my children, and my children are now in their late 40s. So again, that was a different era. My husband was much more involved in their upbringing than my father was. And today, I see my son with his children, and it's a whole different world apart. And I think that's a good thing. I do. I think men were quite isolated from their families 60 odd years ago. It was all about going to work and being the breadwinner for the family, which was a huge responsibility. And so I think it's much better today.
Yeah. I think I agree. Did you have any ambitions as a child growing up through school?
I wanted to be a vet.
You did? Okay.
I loved animals. My parents bred and showed dogs. We had Springer Spaniels and Fox Terriers. Right. And my father trialled dogs, dog trials, and I used to go with him to do that. So I wanted to be a vet until we visited some people on a farm, and I saw the vet put his hand up the cow's backside, and I decided that wasn't going to be good for me. And then I floundered because all my life, so I must have been about 14 when I thought, actually, I don't really think that's the sort of job that I want. And then I really floundered as to what I wanted to do. And I went off then I wanted to be an exchange student, and I wanted to go to America because, television was showing us this wonderful lifestyle in America. And so I wanted to go to America, and I did in my, what would have been my 7th form year. And it wasn't anything like what we saw on television. But during that time, my parents convinced me, my father was sure I'd make a great teacher. And so I got accepted into secondary training, which, I signed the papers because I couldn't think of anything else to do.
Right.
But when I came back, my uncle convinced me to go into computers. And I went and trained with the government as a computer in the computer program to learn how to be a programmer analyst. Right, okay. In the days when, computers filled huge rooms. And so I gave up my teaching, which broke my father's heart. Right. Actually, it took him a long time to come to terms with the fact that I hadn't gone teaching.
Yeah. You weren't following in the family business.
No, and I was the only one, actually, of the 4 children that didn't go teaching. All my brother and sister trained as teachers, and my youngest sister ended up teaching. She trained in hospitality and then ended up teaching that. So I was the only one that didn't go teaching. But as I said to my dad, I became the minister. So that was almost as good.
Yeah. One-upmanship. Very good, very good. So, well, we'll come to that, I think, as we progress through this conversation. But so you're working for the government in computer programming. What was that like, and what did you learn from
Well,
that
it was
period of
it was
time?
exciting because it was really quite new, and it opened up a whole new world. So at that stage, the government had 3 different computers doing different bits of their work, and I worked on the ICL, which was actually converting school certificate into being computerised. And that was when I first got to see the public service, and Roger Hall's gliding on was pretty close to the truth.
Yeah.
My boss would come into work in the morning and he would do the crossword, the Dominion crossword, until morning tea. And we all kept clear of him until he'd completed the crossword. Some of it was absolutely accurate from Roger Hall's perspective.
Yeah.
But I also worked on the Treasury they had a Burroughs machine and an IBM machine, and the IBM machine was the tax system. And later on, as a minister, when we were sitting around the table at a cabinet committee, and the Inland Revenue came to present on their major upgrade, billions of dollars worth of upgrade, because their tax, as they described it, had a central core program, and then over the years little bits had been tacked on it, and basically they said to us, you can't make any more changes, otherwise the system was liable to collapse. And I found for the first time that central core was what I had worked on briefly while I was working for the government way back in 1970.
Yeah.
So and that was still COBOL,
Right.
which was the commercial language of the time.
Yeah. So I just picked up on there as well that you were working on school certificates. So there was still
Yes.
an education.
Yes,
Has there been
that's
an
right.
education angle to everything you've done? I'm just.
There probably has. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what then after that? After those roles?
So then I came back to Hawke's Bay, and Wellington weather just drove me crazy. Came back to Hawke's Bay and went to work in Rothmans, a tobacco company, in their computer section. And that's where I met my husband.
Right.
And he was at that time, he was quality control manager. And so we had a whirlwind romance. I was heading off overseas with my work colleague. So the two of us were going to go overseas. And at that stage, if you had COBOL language, computer language, and a bit of Fortran, which was a scientific language, you could get work anywhere in the world. And so we were heading away. And then I met my husband, and I had to make the decision, did I go off and carry on with my overseas travel, or did I think that this guy was something special and I should hang around a bit? And I made the latter decision, and I was absolutely right, because I certainly got a jewel.
Yeah. And you've am I right in thinking that you've hung around for quite a bit? Is it? Are you
It's our 50th wedding
50th?
anniversary
Yeah,
this
I
year.
thought it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
congratulations on that. Yeah, that's a big milestone. So then what? You get married fairly young, I think.
Yeah, I was 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible to think
Yeah.
about that today, but that
Yeah.
was the norm.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And he was older than me, so he's about 9.5 years older than me. So he was really ready to settle down and have a family. And so yes, so our son was born a year and 8 days later, and then a year later our daughter was born. And in those days, of course, when you got pregnant, you had to stop work. So I gave up work when I was about 5 months pregnant. I mean, today, and I didn't have any front facing, I could, today you'd carry on working and take your maternity leave and come back. But in those days, that wasn't the case. So we had a family, and my husband, because we had it was a year and a day between the two children, so it was worse than twins, because one would be up and the other one would be down, and then they'd swap. So at that stage, Alan changed his job and he took over management of the night shift, which meant that he was home until 2:00 and worked 2 till 10. So we could have our main meal in the middle of the day, and he could help a bit with the children. And we did that for a while, and then I realised that we were both smokers, and I remember saying to him, look, I want you around to see our grandchildren, and I really think he was on their taste panel, so he would be smoking maybe up to 60 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Not the whole thing, because
Yes,
you're
of
tasting,
course.
you only
Yep.
taste a little bit of it, but still it was a lot. And so he looked for another job, and he went to work at Tomorna Freezing Works in Hastings as an assistant works manager, and he was in charge of the beef house and all the extra bits and pieces. He didn't manage the sheep part of it, but everything else he managed. And I felt a lot happier, and we ate some pretty darn good meat.
Very good. Oh, and what were you thinking, Anne, at that point in time? Obviously, you're
I got
full-time
frustrated
mum.
being at home.
I was going to ask, yeah. So, what were your thoughts about career at that point?
Well, I still didn't have any career thoughts. I did want to go back, and I eventually did go back and worked in the computer section. But I did get very frustrated. I found it really boring at home, and I did all sorts of things. I managed for Halen Research. I managed their Hawke's Bay survey process. I painted signs for supermarket windows for their specials. I did all sorts of things to get a bit of extra pin money and to keep myself out and about. I wasn't, I wouldn't describe myself as a very devoted mother. I mean, I love my children, but they weren't enough stimulation for me, and I didn't get involved in all the things that mums get involved with normally when their focus is totally on their children. I needed more, and I was young. I mean, I think by the time I was 30, all my children were at school. So I did go back and I worked for a company called Williams and Kettle, who were a computer bureau, and I worked part-time for them. My husband and I have always been, when I met him, he was always involved in property. So we had a lot of rental flats. We converted, we'd buy an old house and convert it into flats, or we'd buy an old house. We've lived in big old Edwardian or Victorian homes to save them from demolition and done them up and turned them into homes. And so I then went into selling real estate for a couple of years. And because I thought, well, I can contribute to that by understanding the market, and you can find all sorts of opportunities. So I did that for a couple of years, which I really hated.
Right. Okay. What was it about that you didn't like?
It's just such an up and down, and you can put a lot of work into trying to find people a home. You go through a whole lot of questions about what they want, and then they end up buying something from someone else that's completely different from what they told you they wanted. So I think you have to be a lot more serene than I am.
Right. Okay. And so what was next in your kind of...
So then we had decided when we got married we'd have our children early, and then we would go on the overseas trip. My husband had done his OE. I'd obviously stopped mine. So we decided that we would then go as a family. So we had a 10-year plan to do that. It took us 11 years, but we had enough income coming in from our rental properties, and we took our 3 children overseas and had 18 months. Bought a camper van in London, as you do.
Okay.
And my husband's brother lived in Oxford.
Right.
And so we had his place as a sort of a base that we could head out from. And then we took off across Europe, and we had 12 months with 3 children in a camper van in non-English speaking countries. We had about 4 months altogether in Greece, where we looked after a campground for someone through those winter months and got a cabin as a result of that, so we could get out of the van. And then we had 3 months in Egypt. We had an apartment in Egypt. So I travelled around, and in the years as the kids went through their teenage years, and you've got that ahead of you, but sometimes it can be quite difficult. We always had that experience as a base, that it was something we could talk about comfortably. And as a family, I think it strengthened us, because we really did rely on one another for conversation. And we still talk about different experiences that we had.
Very good. So you've had a great trip overseas, and when you come back, what was next?
Yeah, well, neither of us had a job.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting time. So we went in 86, came back in 87, and we came back, and the plan was that my husband, his father had died while we were away, and he left me in Greece and came back to New Zealand, and he bought a set of flats, and so the plan was that he was going to turn those into own your owns, and he was going to work on that full time. So he's going to do full-time developing. And so I didn't have a job, and I looked around, and the council elections were coming up, and I said to him, I think one of us should stand, because we'd always bumped heads with the planning department. Right. Things need to change. And he said, well, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, okay, well, I'll have a go. And so I stood for council, and to my great surprise, I got elected. And that started my political career, really.
Yeah. So what was the motivation to get into, albeit at that stage, local politics? Was the main driver because of the stoushes that you'd had with the planning department?
Yeah, it was really to get to try and get a planning system that actually encouraged people to do things rather than found reasons to stop them. Right. And that was how we felt, and some of the people that we mixed with who were doing similar things. You always seem to be arguing as to why you should be able to do something rather than have the council helping you. And it hasn't changed. I still get that from people today. Yeah. But that was my motivation, really, to go in and see if I could make a difference to the way that the council worked with people in its community.
So rather than spend all the money and time and energy on finding reasons not to do things, ask how can we?
How can we help? This is going to be difficult because of X, Y, and Z, but have you thought about X, and have you thought about Y, and we could help you to do maybe investigate Z.
So you're in the council, you've been elected.
I'm in the council.
And how was that for you? Was that...
It's a steep learning curve.
Yeah.
I had an amazing mayor, a man called Dave Prebenson, and he ran a local business. I think he was into piping and I want to say drainage, but I think he actually manufactured the pipes for drainage, and a very clever man, and he was very, very supportive of me, and helped me tremendously, and elevated me quite quickly into a chairmanship. And as I say, that was a really interesting time. So first of all, 87 was the stock market crash. So the whole market changed, and property changed quite dramatically, and we lost a lot of money actually in the process. But local government was changing quite dramatically too. And people talk about the reforms of 89, and they think about the amalgamations, and that was a big part of it. But also it was a transformational time for local government. We had the old town clerk who sort of, it was all very laid back, and it was done on the smell of an oily rag, and it wasn't. You don't want to be derogatory, because actually it worked really well, and huge investment was made into creating communities, but it needed to be modernised, and all of that was happening. And so my mayor, David, saw that this was coming, and he started changing the Napier City Council into a much more professional corporate based model. And he gave me the chairmanship of that corporate committee to oversee those changes. So changes to the way that accounts were managed, changes to so that we were prepared then for those big changes that the reforms of '89 made. And we were in a very good position. And I think that's because he came from a business background and he knew, how you had to run your accounts in a business-like way, and set your budgets and work to the budget. And so that was a really interesting time. And I thoroughly enjoyed the work. And then the next election was a new mayor came in, and he asked me to be his deputy. I think I was the highest polling candidate, but he asked me to be his deputy. The day I was sworn in then was the day that there were two big meatworks in Hastings, Whakatū and Tomona. And the day I was sworn in, Whakatū freezing works closed, because I guess there was all that reform in the freezing works happening at that time. So that was a really interesting period. And Hawke's Bay's unemployment went to 18.5%. And that's when I realised, and we did a whole lot of things. Michael Laws was actually the Hawke's Bay Member of Parliament, and we did a lot of work together creating employment within the councils to try and, that's devastating for the community. And so that was when I knew that if you really wanted to make a difference, you had to be in Wellington, because we could do stuff, but we were really fiddling around the edges. If you really wanted to change how your communities work and how you manage change, you had to be in Wellington.
So it's interesting. I was going to ask you about that. So obviously at that time you described the state of the economy at the time. So I imagine that maybe the reasons for getting into local politics, wanting to make changes around, freeing up the blockages for getting things done, might not necessarily be as necessary at that time, because maybe there wasn't the kind of infrastructure being built and development.
Well, it all came to a shuddering halt, really.
Yeah, it would do. Yeah,
because and interest rates. So if you just look at the project that Alan was involved in, by the time we actually picked up the money to do the work, we were paying 22-23% in interest.
Wow. Yeah.
And then GST was introduced, and so construction came to a grinding halt all over the place, and it was a time of big reform. Reform.
So you've talked about that reform within the council, but were the changes that you'd kind of entered politics for, were you able to make any of those, or did you?
Not really. They kept me because then you have a conflict of interest, because you actually have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And the job I always wanted was chairman of the planning committee, and I couldn't have that because I had a real conflict of interest.
Right.
And I didn't get support around the table. So I did a whole lot of other things.
Right.
But didn't get what I really wanted.
That's interesting. Yeah, being the conflict of interest that stopped you. I suppose my line of questioning was really having considered politics in the past for myself, because I wanted to see change. How easy is it actually on the inside to bring about that change when you think on your outside, surely all you need to do is just this?
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, it's slow, and it can, any change in any organisation, there's always a core of people who don't like change, very comfortable. And so all the failures that I look back on, it's not all that core, but it's a failure to address that core, to take them on that journey with you. And I understand it, because change is really worrying for people. It can be quite traumatic. we fear change generally as human beings, but
that's the key word, isn't it? Fear. I think
yeah,
that's
it
what
is.
stops us all
Yeah,
from
it
any
is.
kind of change, isn't
Because
it?
you don't know what it's going to be like once it's all changed, and you're very comfortable. It might not be that flash, but you're comfortable with where you are. And so a different way of doing things, a different way of thinking about things, is tough. So you got to penetrate down through your organisation, and at a political level, certainly at a ministerial level, that is really hard to do. Really hard to do, because you never get anywhere near that middle layer.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? You'd think that in those kind of roles that you would have some element of control. Otherwise,
you think you do. I mean, you can make structural changes. You can oversee and require structural changes, but often it's much more complicated than you see from the outside.
Well, if we can, we'll come to that in a bit more detail, because we've skipped ahead again. I wanted to ask you a question. Am I right in the research that you were deputy mayor at Napier and on the regional council at the same time?
Yes. So in that reformation of local government, the regional councils were established, which brought together a whole lot of little boards like Rabbit Board and the Catchment Board, and a whole lot of those were brought together with an environmental and regulatory focus. And so I stood for the inaugural and was elected onto the inaugural Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And that was really good because we actually had on it the mayors of Hastings and Napier, and got to be careful what I say, don't I? But they've never always got on. I mean, a lot of the time they never got on. Napier Hastings has a long history of antagonism and conflict. And at one stage, the mayor of Hastings wouldn't cross the river to come to Napier, and the mayor of Napier wouldn't cross the river to go to Hastings, and so the deputy mayors did all the socialising. But sitting around that Hawke's Bay regional table, we had the two mayors, and we had the deputy mayors of Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings, Napier, and Wairoa, and it was a huge opportunity to, to really put a regional lens over everything that we're doing. And we even introduced the hospital, which had been bubbling away because there was a hospital in Napier that was getting old, and a hospital in Hastings that was getting old. And there was a conversation starting to be had about, do we need one hospital for this area, and blah, 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 where would it be? And unfortunately, I was trying to think of his name. He was the MP National was in government, and he was the MP for Queenstown, and he was the Minister for Local Government, and he decided that you had to be one or t'other. You couldn't be both. It wasn't right to be both, even though you could be an MP and a member of either council.
Right.
And so he changed the law, and you had to decide. And I thought that was such a missed opportunity for Hawke's Bay to come together and work together as a region. And there have been amalgamation tries a couple of times, which have failed. But that was a really good catalyst, and that was disappointing.
Right.
But for me, my time on the regional council, I didn't really enjoy. It's too far removed from people for me.
Okay.
Whereas council, local government, is really, you're really close. You're dealing with your community on a daily basis. Whereas the regional council is a bit more removed, and dealing with more ethereal things like air quality, water quality, land quality, and it didn't thrill me as much.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier about the only way to make a real difference is to go to Wellington. So
I started talking to my husband about that, but my children were still at school, and I knew I didn't want to be away from home. I had teenagers, and I didn't think that would be good for them. So I was quite happy to wait until they'd largely finished school. And then I'd always kept out of national politics. I've always enjoyed local government. That you knew that people were more left or right, or centrist, but national politics didn't play a big role. So I'd always kept out of politics. The local Labor MP had approached me quite early on in my local government. He had diabetes. Jeff Braybrook was his name. And he had contracted diabetes and was considering retiring. And he had approached me to see if I would be interested. And I said to say to him, I did think about it because it was a safe Labor seat. But I said to him, look, I would be wrong. It would be wrong for me to take up that opportunity because I'm not really a Labor person. I'm really more to the right than that. And we remain good friends. But I did start talking to my husband about what it would mean and would he consider it, and then I did stand in. So I didn't get elected back onto council in 96. I didn't really try. I got quite disenchanted. We had a great council which rebuilt Napier City Centre actually, and it's still like that today. And then the following council, we just had some people from outside council who just made life difficult. They questioned everything. They were always constantly in the media criticising, and that actually wears you down. And I was doing quite a lot of work with the development of McLean Park, and we got the lighting. It was just a happy coincidence that the lighting technology was changing at the same time as television camera technology. And so I convinced the New Zealand Cricket Council and New Zealand Rugby to put a bit of money in to help us, and we put lights into McLean Park. And we had the first day-night cricket there, and we had the first night All Black trial on McLean Park. So I was doing a lot of work with that. And in those days, the different breweries sponsored the different codes. So there was always an argument between cricket and rugby as to how long they played and how long their breweries' signs were up. And again, an individual who just came in at the last minute and just made life really, really difficult with everything we're trying to do. And it's the only time in my whole career that I really felt I was up against someone who resented the fact I was a woman. And it was a male domain. Rugby is about men, not women. Right. And so therefore, what right have you to be involved? It's the only time in my life I've really come up against that so overtly. And I just got so fed up with all of this. And I didn't even run a campaign. I didn't have the strength, looking back on it, I didn't have the strength to say, this is not for me anymore. I just took the easy way out, really, and I knew I wouldn't be re-elected and didn't try. Right. Which my father gave me heaps of.
Can imagine after what you said earlier.
Yeah, but was very supportive, and so that was then my opportunity to get involved with national politics. Right. That created the gap, if you like.
Sure. And so you did that?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got very high on the list, actually. I had a great team who worked really hard to help me, and I went into Parliament at number 20 on the list under Jenny Shipley. But I went in as a list MP based in Napier, and then tried to win that electorate when Jeff Braybrook retired, tried to win that electorate and failed. So I had a 2002 to 2005. I didn't have, wasn't in Parliament, and wasn't sure whether I wanted to go back. Really wasn't sure. And then I had my arm twisted by a couple of colleagues who brought me the data and said, we think that the East Coast electorate is winnable. and we'll help you build a team and support you. And so it meant moving to Gisborne. And so my poor dear husband helped, we sold our house and we moved up to Gisborne. He was reluctant, in fairness, the last minute. But I worked for a year, campaigned for a year to win that seat. And I'll always be grateful to my husband, because if I hadn't got elected, we were on the skin of on the bones of our bum, as they say, because we used all our resources, really. And people help you. I mean, there were people that gave me petrol tokens and would come round and, there was always a box of goodies left on the doorstep and they help you in a lot of ways. But it was a big electorate, and I did a week in Gisborne and then I'd drive over and do a week in Whakatane, because the electorate went from Wairoa right round to the middle of the Whakatane River. So it was a big electorate. It got bigger in my time, but it took a lot to actually, a lot of expense to be moving around constantly. And people gave me accommodation and were really, really helpful. About 3 weeks out from the election, I was driving over the Trafford's Hill, which is the big hill at the end of the Waiweka Gorge on the Gisborne side, and my car stopped. A truckie gave me a ride back to where I could get a phone, and I rang a towing company in Aportiki who came out and picked up my car, didn't charge me, took it back to a great man in Whakatane called Wally Sutherland, who dropped an engine into it. He said, I don't know how long it'll last. I said, Wally, I got $2,000 worth of sign writing on this car. It's only got to last 2.5 weeks. And he didn't send me a bill for a couple of months, and then he halved it. So, people help you, but it still is a big ask, financial risk that people take when they stand as candidate, that I don't think a lot of people understand.
No, I don't think they do. Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting insight. So you're an MP. What's it like being an MP?
Oh, it was amazing. I used to turn up to Parliament. I never got over the awe, if you like, of walking up those steps and thinking, I actually, I work here. Yeah. It is a really, really special, privileged position to be in. And the day you stop that is the day you should retire. Stop feeling that way. It's the day you should retire. Yeah.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors. I'm really pleased to announce that we have Sharp New Zealand as a sponsor. And it's great to have Sharp on board, because as a customer, I can speak about their products and services from personal experience. And it feels good to be able to endorse and recommend a company because of the level of satisfaction we have regarding the services they provide. And across my businesses, we've certainly been impressed with the care and collaboration we've experienced in our dealings with Sharp. It's certainly a brand that we trust. Sharp has a long history of creating breakthrough products designed to meet the needs of people living in New Zealand. Sharp's leadership in technology innovation ensures it's at the forefront of the pack, providing business solutions from printing and photocopying to interactive meeting solutions and ICT phone systems. No matter where you are or what size your organisation, whether you're large or small, Sharp New Zealand can provide their services to you nationwide. If you're looking to upgrade your technology or renew your photocopier leases, talk to your local Sharp team or visit the website at sharp.net.nz. Yeah. And so maybe if we can, I'm conscious of the time. I could talk to you all day about this. It's really interesting stuff. But I'm conscious of the time. So can we like kind of maybe zoom forward a little bit, because you're not just an MP, you've become a minister. So can you talk to me about that, how that came about and what that feels like? I mean, that's a level above again, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is. And really, I don't understand anyone who goes to Parliament who doesn't aspire to be a minister, because that's, you get to sit at that table at the top floor on the 10th floor of the Beehive. And New Zealand has a really unique Westminster system, that cabinet table is only cabinet ministers. There's no officials there. You have to know your stuff. You have to be well briefed. So there's no help if you're trying to convince your colleagues. If you've got a paper, there's no help from your officials. You're the one that can be questioned by 19 people, particularly the Prime Minister. So I've never understood anyone who didn't aspire to be a cabinet minister. And really you pinch yourself that you have that opportunity. And I just, I worked with some amazing people. John Key was just an incredible intellect. Bill English, the biggest intellect I've ever come across in all my life. Beats even my husband. I don't tell him that too often. And people like Stephen Joyce, who just have so much commercial knowledge, and it was an absolute pleasure to go in and someone like Chris Finlayson, who's a very talented lawyer, but he brought to his treaty work such innovation that brought both worlds together, Matarangi Māori and the Maori worldview, and melded that into legal frameworks in ways that no one had ever thought about before. And so, there was some amazing, amazing times. One of the things that people forget is, of course, when we went and became government, we had the global financial crisis. So you go into government and you think, this is going to be great, I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and there was no money. And I remember Bill English saying, there will be no extra expenditure this year. So if you want to do anything new, you've got to stop doing stuff. So that became my mantra. I had up on my notice board Rutherford saying, we have no money, therefore we have to think. And it was a really good discipline, actually. But I do remember we had a big expo with all different groups, trying to get together and talk about how we could bring the country back to its feet in a whole different range of ways. And it was held up in Auckland. And we came back to Cabinet after it, and the one thing that had got through with new money was $50 million, which was a lot of money for cycle trails. And you think, we went, well, this is the boss's, this is the Prime Minister's promoted this, so we all had to go along with it. But you think how that little, what seemed like a lot of expenditure, but actually it was a drop in the bucket. And you think how that has changed New Zealand in the last 20 years. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So, you get to experience just such interesting, unexpected treasures that stay with you for life.
Yeah. What were some of the highlights for you in your? Because you were in politics for what about? I went up national politics, maybe
National politics,
18 years, I think.
18 actual, spanned 21 because of course I had a term out. Oh, look, I think being a cabinet minister always is a highlight, and you have your triumphs, and you have. I still have a passion for education. Obviously, that's my background. That's my family experience. I picked up a portfolio that I knew New Zealand had been at the top of the list and was on the downward slope, and we tried to do things to lift our particularly our Māori and Pacifica students, but also. And I see Nationals brought it back again to get some accountability back to parents, because teachers only have kids for a short period of time. Actually, your best teachers are your parents, but they need to understand how their child is doing, where the weak areas are, where they can help. And, I worked hard to try and get that through to the unions, that it wasn't about judging good teaching or bad teaching. It was about trying to create a progress that could be followed by both teachers and parents and students. Actually, the students picked it up very well. I went into classrooms where kids would take me out and there'd be a big wall that would have, the progress that they were making. And they say, well, look, I'm really bad. I'm not doing particularly well in my mathematics, but my reading, I'm way ahead of blue class or whatever it was. So as I say, kids know. They know who they know which groups are the top groups and which aren't, and they know that whether they're up with the rest of the class or falling behind.
Yeah. So are you referring to, Anne, there about the
national standards
implementation?
Yeah, and the opposition used to say, well, they're not national and they're not standard. Well, of course they're not standard. I was very much conscious of the fact you don't want to teach to a test. You don't want to be testing kids because that only says what they learn on one day. Whereas what you want to be doing is watching a child's progress over a period of time and using various ways that teachers have to assess the progress that they were making, and then track that and talk to parents about it, because parents can help. I had my granddaughters for the week before Christmas, and their mother said to me, the teachers said, for the littlest one, we've got to keep her reading up because kids over the Christmas holidays, 6 weeks, they often fall behind if they're not natural, enthusiastic readers in particular. So she has to, can you make sure that every night we go through one of her books? And that's how parents want to be involved and need to be involved in children's education. And all too often you hear parents say, look, I have no idea. I just have no idea. And I don't know what I can do to help.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was, I still am passionate about education.
I can tell.
I still want to make sure that, because it is the enabler. It means it doesn't matter what your background is. If you get a good education and it enables you to go on and do a whole lot of things. As Minister of Tertiary, which I was for about 14, 15 months, nearly killed me to have the whole lot. I said to Jan Tonetti, be careful. But, to be at a graduation and see someone who was the first person in their family ever to get a degree, that is really something. Or even to go on to be the first person in their family to go on to tertiary education. That is really something, and that gives that person a huge opportunity in life. So education is the enabler.
So was that a difficult time for you implementing that? I mean, from what I've read,
it was. The worst thing was, and we saw a bit of it this weekend, that some people are so wound up with their point of view that they don't care about their safety or other people's safety. And the worst time I had was a conference in Rotorua, and I've done something with early childhood, and so there were protesters there about early childhood. And regardless of what went on in the conference, when I came out, there was a whole group of people from the early childhood sector, and I stopped and talked to them, and talked about what, because you're always trying to explain. There's always reasons why you do. You don't just do things because you want to get at them, or off the top of your head you thought it was a good idea. There's normally, a thoughtful process that you've been through, and trying to explain to them what my thinking was, why I was doing whatever I was. I can't even remember what it was now. And then after about 10 minutes, I wasn't getting anywhere, and they're starting to wind themselves up. And so I had the Secretary for Education, Karen Sewell, was with me, and my press secretary, and can't remember, there's someone else, might have been an advisor. And they said, the car's waiting. I think you should get away now. So we did, and we took my leave of the people and got in the car, and then some of them went and put themselves in front of the car with their children. They had small children with them. And that was really scary, that they would risk, put their own children at risk to make a political point. There was a bit of that, which, it was tough.
How does that kind of, that, when you say it's tough, how does that really feel? So I think there's something in this.
Scary.
I mean, obviously, it's when you're a politician, minister, you're very much in the public eye, and we can see what's on the surface, right? But you've already told us that you're a person who keeps your emotions, behind a bit of a screen, for want of a better phrase. But how is it real? I mean, at the end of the day, you're just a person trying to do your best.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Never mind
right.
what side of the
Yeah.
political fence you're on. You're trying to do what you think is best. And like you said, it's not just a off the cuff kind of idea. There's some thought and there's some
There's a
effort and energy that's
process.
gone into it
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
back of that. How does it feel though when you're coming up against that kind of thing, when you're implementing the standards and you're getting pushed back from principles and all that kind of stuff? How do you take that personally?
You either cope with it or you don't, and a lot of people don't. I think because I am that sort of person, I could keep that inside, and I could still have present a reasonable face. Try and get a bit of humour sometimes. Like that conference, they'd organised different placards, different coloured placards. So when I mentioned particular words, they would hold up those placards, which was a bit silly, really. My way of coping with it was when I knew I was going to say national standards, I'd say to them, I'm going to say it, so get ready to hold the blue ones up, Another time I went and they were standing at the back. I think it was PPTA, and they were all standing at the back with these big placards, but I didn't have my glasses on and I'm short-sighted, so I couldn't read them. And I said afterwards, look, I'm sorry, but I couldn't see what was on your placards because I didn't have my glasses on. So you develop ways of coping, but that one with the people in front of the car was the first time I really saw fanaticism almost. And I had a really good relationship with my chief executive, with Karen Sewell, and she could see through my facade that I was really shaken by that. She took me off to a coffee bar. Actually, I went past it not long ago, and I felt myself shaking because I got there and I just burst into tears with her in the bathroom. And then, she took me out and we had a cup of coffee and we sat round and sort of had a bit of a debrief. But generally, I've been fortunate that I've had chief executives who've helped me with a lot of that. You develop good relationships, trusting relationships, and so they can see through the facade a bit. But it does shake you, and as I say, many people give up. They can't cope with it.
The stress.
It is stressful. And I've had a really good family who've always been very supportive, both children and particularly my husband. And then the party itself actually gave me a huge amount of support. And one or two party members would ring me just out of the blue and just, say, look, I know what your job's, it's tough. And so extraneous support. And then every now and then I'd get someone from the education sector who would also reinforce that we actually believe, you're on the right track.
Right. Yeah.
You're doing the right thing. So all of that sort of bolsters you it's when you feel you're absolutely alone, I think that's the most vulnerable time. And
have you felt that, Anne? Have you been in those situations?
No, I haven't. I've always I haven't, which is probably why I've been able to cope so well.
You've talked, and I wanted to touch on this to make sure I remembered to do so, because you've just mentioned your family there and your parents. Obviously, I think your parents must have been really proud when you became Minister of Education.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, because did I also read that your mum couldn't, because she was a woman, didn't get higher education. And then so here you are, Minister of Education. Right. So that must have been a great thing for you and your family, and obviously very supportive. You've talked about your team, I think, in your valedictory speech as well. You made reference to everybody in your team that supported you. So obviously that was very important in helping you get through those tough times, not just the good times, but the tough times as well. How important is it to have good people around you in those kind of roles?
Very important. And I've always said, particularly to my team, my family, I don't have to say it to because they do it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, I've never wanted to have people around me who were what you'd call yes people. Always given my staff free license to be upfront and honest. I've always respected that. I can be defensive like anyone. Criticism's always hard to take, but it's I've welcomed having a team that can be honest with me, but also very supportive. And I've had some amazing people work with me and for me over the years. Family are always frank, and that's good. That's fine, because you need that. They ground you. But I just think I've been incredibly fortunate, and even now where I am in Tauranga, as in the commission, tremendous staff there supporting the work that the commission's trying to do, and my fellow commissioners. Each one of us brings different skills to the table, and you respect that, and you make the most of it, and you end up with a very strong team.
Yeah. I want to pick up on a comment that you said, I think is an important one, which is words to the effect of, that nobody likes criticism. It's hard to take, but it's also necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And I think if we shy away from criticism, hearing each other's perspectives, hearing someone else's different opinion, there's no growth in that.
No. So, as a minister, of course, 3 days a week you're down in the House and you can be questioned. And so we always had a debrief afterwards. How did I handle that? Because I'm not actually, I've never been good at quick off the mark. I don't have that sense of humour that I can make. Some people have that witty repartee that they can crack up at.
I like to think I do, but I don't think. Maybe I don't.
I just know I don't. And so very early on, I decided, when I became a minister, I decided I wasn't going to do the Women's Weekly type thing. That's not my style. And I wasn't going to try and be the witty person in Parliament. That's not my style. I'm serious. I want serious roles, and I want to be taken seriously. So when questioned, I want to give factual answers. I want to be, open. And so I wasn't always. And we'd have a debrief, and particularly my press secretary. I had 2 press secretaries. One of them was with me almost the whole time I was a minister, for which I was eternally grateful. He was a very dour Glaswegian, but a very, very good man. And he would tell me, well, I don't really. You could have done that. You could have done this in a different way. His criticism was always in a constructive way. And that's what makes the difference, I think. So I learned a lot, and you do. If everyone tells you you're wonderful all the time, well, you never change. You keep on doing the same old things, and as we know, if you keep on doing the same old things, you get the same results.
Exactly. No, that's good. That's good. I'm conscious of the time, and I really want to get to your current role as commissioner at the Tauranga City Council.
Yeah.
I've read a little bit about your thoughts on. I think there was a quote, words to the effect of, "This is not necessarily the right way to do things," but you're in there. Can you just describe how that came about and what your thoughts are on the need for that to happen?
Yes. No, it isn't. It isn't the right way, and I think everyone regrets that it was necessary, but it was necessary, and for a whole lot of reasons. So I got a call. I'd retired, and I got a call in January to ask if I would be interested in the role. Now this was 2021, so we were still sort of coming out of COVID. So we still had restrictions and things. So my husband and I had a good talk about it, and it was for about 14 months, I think, the proposal. And look, I'd spent the last 15 years working to help with the economic success of the Eastern Bay of Plenty. Things like the mussel farm in Portakey were going to be massively life-changing for the people that lived there. And so, but all of that relied on Tauranga, which I thought was, a growing city, and I thought it was all going well. So I was quite surprised that when that was offered. So I said, well, yes, I'm interested in that. And then they rang and said, would you be interested in taking over as chair? And funnily enough, I've never wanted to be a mayor. I always said, my husband always said, well, why aren't you looking for that? Why aren't you looking? Why aren't you, like women? Don't you want to be the Prime Minister? So I'd never sort of thought about the actual leadership role, and my husband said, well, of course. Why on earth would you not consider that? I said, well, I've never done that. It's you're not a mayor, but you're sort of in that role in the council. So he encouraged me to take it on, and I thought it was a good challenge, see if I could do it. So when I got here and I walked up Devonport Road, I think it was about the second night that I was here, I just could not believe my eyes. It had been a long time since I'd been into Tauranga CBD. And I rang my husband that night and I said, you've got to get over here. And I can see, this city is in trouble. And I hadn't realised, and I don't think anyone in Wellington really realised how bad it had got. Really, for a number of reasons, growth had just overwhelmed the city. And its population has doubled in 30 years. I don't know that there's any other place in New Zealand that's had that. And I kept thinking, I was in cabinet, sitting around the cabinet table talking regional growth and regional development. I had no idea what was happening in Tauranga. So the relationship with Wellington, I think, has not been great. And so the issues that Tauranga was facing and has faced over the last 30 years, I don't think Wellington, the bureaucracy nor the political spectrum, really understood. You had Smart Growth here. I knew that Smart Growth was the sub-regional body that was doing all the planning, and I thought that was handling it all. But the delivery is a whole different ballgame. So we have arterials that have been designed 30 years ago for the population of 30 years ago that haven't been upgraded. The one thing that we have kept up with here is the waters. So the storm water, the wastewater and the drinking water, well managed, very well invested in, and very well prepared for growth. But everything else, we had community groups, sports groups coming and saying, our numbers have trebled in the last 15 years or doubled in the last 15 years. We've been coming to council saying, we're turning people away. We're turning kids away from playing sport. We need more facilities, and nothing's happened. So the job of the commission just got bigger, and we had to say to the minister, well, look, here's the work program. Here's the risks. If we go back to democracy too early and we get the same sort of people back in, nothing will be embedded. So one of the reasons we're put here was to embed a 10-year capital investment program, really. All of that could be overturned overnight. And we really need to be a bit more time to be able to embed it. And that's what the minister gave. So we go back to democracy, elected members in July of next year. Yeah. And I think that will be a good thing for the city. This is long enough to have commissioners in place. And our job has been to try and backfill a lot of that, both with transport and with community facilities, and then prepare the city for growth as well.
So can I ask, and I'm assuming, I don't know much about the commissioner's role. I'm assuming it is to make decisions like you've just described about
Yeah.
long-term investment and infrastructure. But from your perspective, and not to fix necessarily the problems that resulted in you being in this role, but having been in national government and the roles that you've had in the past, both at local and national level, what are the kind of fundamental causes that have led to this situation for Tauranga, and what's to stop it happening again either here or somewhere else?
Yeah. And that's what everyone's worried about, is that we'll go back to the same old ways. So from what I can gather, and I'm not a Tauranga resident, so I go on what people tell me. There's always, so Tauranga started as a small village, and the Mount still talks about the need to keep it as a small, that small beachside vibe. But actually it's New Zealand's fifth largest city. Mm. It's got New Zealand's biggest import port and rapidly becoming its biggest export port, right in the heart of it. So and you have to invest in your cities, and it became a place for retirees, and quite rightly they watch their pennies. They've worked hard all their lives, and so they don't want, the mantra is don't let the rates go up too much. Well, that means you don't invest. And actually, if they look back in their youth, and I've had a few conversations with them, you think, when you were a young family person, what was your council doing? Because most of them were investing to make sure that the city was prepared for the future. And that's what we've got to do. So growth is happening rapidly, which means you've got to think carefully about, and we're challenged geographically, apart from geologically. So we've got all these peninsulas that we can perhaps build on. So the city's spreading out in a whole different range of ways, which means people drive in their cars. That's why we're so car dependent in Tauranga. So you've got to think carefully about how growth's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and then central government has to play its part by providing that infrastructure, that roading infrastructure, to enable urban growth in a sensible way. And that partnership simply hasn't been there. And so a big part of our role has been making sure that Wellington understands exactly what's happening here and how they need to invest as well as the ratepayers to help the city. And that means we all have to be talking the same language. So again, relationships across the sub-region, with the regional council and with Western Bay and with the business sector and with the developers, we all have to be talking the same things, because what happens in Wellington when you get different voices, Wellington stands back.
Yeah. So I get the kind of dichotomy, if you like, of the older generation are the ones that are paying the rates, want to keep those down. The younger generation can't afford housing, so they're not paying rates, but we need all the infrastructure for them and future generations. It's like, where does that investment come from?
That's right. That's exactly right. So what we've tried to do, and the other thing we found was the people were grumpy because they felt they were paying for growth, and actually the residential rates were paying for growth. So we've had a look at the rating system. I have to say the commercial sector has been amazing in that they knew they weren't paying enough, and they've been prepared to pay more. And we've certainly, and we have to have evidence. So we've used the good evidence to back that up. And they might not like paying more, but they are paying considerably more. And that's eased the burden on the residents a bit. We've also then looked at where you can identify particular groups that benefit. So user fees and charges, they should be keeping pace with inflation, so that there's little need for ratepayer subsidy, unless there's a public good, and then you have to decide how much public good versus private good. So trying to get some of those disciplines across. So we act exactly like a council, but you can't, just because we're not elected and we're not looking over our shoulders, which you do when you are a politician, doesn't mean that we don't have to take the community with us. Because if we don't take the community along with us, understanding what we're doing and why, then when we go, they'll just revert back.
Yeah.
So that's been a big part of the focus, is making sure that we talk to people about what's needed, what we're trying to achieve, and where the future lies.
Yeah. Okay. Just very quickly, I've got a question I want to ask. And you mentioned the word disciplines. I think a different context to what I'm going to ask. I think in your valedictory speech, you talked about helping create a code of conduct for Parliament.
Yeah.
There are obviously some, if you like, high-level issues around the region of being on the same page, understanding, investing for the future, that kind of thing. But as a council who have to wade through all of that and produce outcomes that will, A, get them re-elected because they're doing good things that the people support, but B, are things that is progress because it's needed. What do we need to change as far as councils are concerned and how they function and operate together? Because from the outside, I do a lot of work in leadership and teams and workplace cultures and things like that. From the outside looking in, and I appreciate that's just one perspective, it looked like that team couldn't get along and work out how to work as a team, which was causing a problem for everyone.
Well, that's a role for leadership. That's the reality. The mayor has to, as the leader, has to be the one that shapes that team. Now, you're never going to get a whole group of people from different walks of life, different ages, different backgrounds, different experience, different skills, all thinking as one. If you do, there's something wrong, because that's not our community. But see, a big part of governance is collective responsibility. I've always, to me, that's my mantra. Let's have a jolly good ding-dong debate, and respectful, because everyone brings their point of view and they're entitled to that. But let's thrash it out. Well, once we make a decision, we've made that decision, and then we all get in behind it.
Commit to it.
Because sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And for me, in politics, is all about compromise. You never get 100% of what you want. And that's right. That's actually right, because that way lies dictatorship. So I think of I think one of the best examples was David Seymour getting the end of life legislation through, and that had been tried 3 or 4 times and not succeeded. Now, yes, the community was probably in a different place. But I saw David, because I was deputy speaker, and I sat through, the endless all-night sessions till the early morning. I saw David make compromises all over the place in order to keep his votes. Because what was important was getting the 61 votes to get it over the line. In the end, getting the legislation was over the line. And that's what politics is all about, is you've got to be prepared to make a compromise, and you've got to be prepared that you've got to let go of some of your pet projects or ideas, because you can't get that agreement round the table. But once the decision's made, then everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel, and you get on and you deliver it. And what we have seen in Tauranga is that hasn't happened, and the people who've lost the vote have then gone back and tried to rehash it all, garner more support to come back and have their way. And that's not only destructive to the community, because it says a decision's not a decision. It's like saying, how many times do you say no to your kids? And then eventually, if they keep nagging, you eventually say yes. Well, you've undermined all the no's beforehand, and that's what decision-making is like. But you also destroy your organisation. So we ended up with an organisation that was really good at planning, terrified to put up a report that wasn't, didn't dot every I and cross every T, but also incapable of delivery, because it hired a whole lot of people that were good at planning, because they never had to deliver anything, because it just went round and round and round. And if a decision was made, they knew that in 6 weeks' time that decision would be reviewed and probably changed. And so you end up with a car park that's being built and decisions are still being made around what it's going to be used for.
Yeah.
So eventually it's structurally unsound.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sorry to say that we're going to have to, because you've got important meetings to go to. Otherwise, I would stay here all day and have this conversation. And maybe we have to invite you back and continue if you are open to that. But look, can I just say thank you very much again for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really do appreciate it. I could have got into a lot more detail in a lot more areas, I'm sure,
Yes.
had time not have been a constraint. But I'm grateful for what we did get from you, the words of wisdom that you've shared with us and your experiences and lessons learned. It's been
You're
fantastic.
very welcome. I mean, I just consider myself a really fortunate person that I've had such amazing opportunities. And that means that I've had a really fascinating life. When I look at my life, it's fascinating. And I've met some amazing people and had incredible experiences that I'm ever so grateful for.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Cheers.
As you will hopefully know by now, if you've seen other episodes, this segment of the podcast is all about wisdom worth sharing. At the end of every interview, I look back as part of the editing process and discover some of the gems that came out during the conversation, and I summarise them here. Before I get into the wisdom that Anne shared with us, I need to mention Anne's legacy. Due to time constraints, Anne needed to be at another meeting, and I ran out of time. Wasn't able to ask her about her legacy until after the interview had finished. Anne told me to refer to her valedictory speech from when she retired from Parliament as a National MP after nearly 20 years. Essentially, Anne's life's work, and thus her legacy, has been to help positively change lives through bringing about change to systems. This was what drove her to get into local politics in the first place, serving as Deputy Mayor of Napier City Council, as well as elected member on the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. It was her passion for change that drove her to then be in Wellington as an elected Member of Parliament, where over a period of about 18 years, she served as Minister for Education, Minister for Social Development, Minister of Corrections, Minister of Police, and Minister of Local Government. The latter possibly resulting in her being invited to take on her current role as Commissioner overseeing the Tauranga City Council, where she continues to bring about change that will affect the lives of all who live in the region, now and into the future. Irrespective of your political persuasion, it's important, I feel, to recognise the work of someone who has passionately believed in something, enough to give up their personal lives, and as we've heard from other politicians on this show, work long, hard days to bring about positive change for the people they serve. Whether you believe what they believe or not, we must acknowledge the effort and commitment that goes into dedicating your life to something, like Anne has. It's easy for us to stand back and pick fault with what they do from a distance, but would we swap our lives for theirs and put ourselves up for the level of criticism that they receive? I nearly did at one point. Well, I was willing to put my name forward anyway as a candidate. But in many ways, I'm glad that I was able to learn a lot from that process without actually having to follow through and become a politician. I think it's harder than it looks. And I believe there are not that many who would knowingly and willingly subject themselves to the range of emotions they must experience on a daily basis, from frustration and self-doubt through to a sense of achievement, and then witnessing the highs and lows of those they serve. Anne called herself a stroppy, straight-talking person who holds back and doesn't like to show her emotions. But that she was tested when she was Minister for Education by young children who would bring her to tears. Anne talked about the fact that it's always hard to take criticism, but without criticism, there's no growth. People fear change. Even when it can bring about good things for us, we become stuck in our comfort zone. That might not be that flash where we are, but there's uncertainty with change, and that can keep us where we are. Anne talked lovingly about her parents. Understandably, she was emotional, recalling her childhood after the recent passing of both her dad and then her mum. They were both teachers, and they were very strict, according to Anne. who was the eldest of 4 children, all of whom followed in their parents' footsteps and went into teaching, including Anne, who left after a short while at her father's dismay. But as she told him, she went on to become the Minister of Education. Whether it was because they were teachers or a sign of the times, her parents drove their children to succeed, even questioning when they came second. Why did that happen? So that they could learn from it and do better next time. It seems far removed from the times that we're currently in, where that kind of attitude is almost frowned upon. I asked Anne if her mum and dad's approach to parenting was beneficial to her, and she believes it was. It was integral in her being successful in her own life. It taught her that you had to work hard. The more you put in, the more you get out, Anne said, but you also have to be open to learning in order to grow. Anne reminded us that failing to do so means that we keep doing the same things expecting different results, which, as we know from the famous Einstein quote, is the definition of insanity. As an extension of being open-minded and willing to learn, Anne talked about the need for compromise. She said it was key to progress. Without compromise, ultimately, we end up with a dictatorship. I was reminded of Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, which I refer to in my work a lot. When Anne spoke of the need for everyone to have their say, have a bit of a ding-dong, I think Anne labelled it as, and then everybody must get behind the decision and not pull in different directions, engaging in backroom politics, because this is when things fall apart. The role of the leader is to engage everyone, be open to different perspectives, but then make a decision and take everyone on the journey with them. That is leadership. If nobody's following, you simply can't be a leader. Hopefully, you've been able to take away many insights from this interview that you can apply to some aspect of your life, work, and legacy. Use them, share them. As I always say, sharing is like teaching, and teaching helps us to retain what we've learned and enables us to commit to change, which is always necessary if we are to enhance our life's work. I hope that you're successful, happy, and safe in all that you do, and remember, live a life that's a story worth retelling. I'm Steve Worsley, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Life's Work, the podcast all about wisdom worth sharing.